Top 1. The Orang Medan. Broadcast in June 1947, multiple radio stations across the Strait of Malacca intercepted a distress transmission on the international maritime frequency of 500 kilohertz. The signal was weak but clear enough to transcribe. The message began with a chilling declaration. All officers, including captain, dead in chart room and on bridge. Probably whole crew dead. There was a pause. Then another line followed. I die. The signal ended in silence. The coordinates embedded in the transmission placed the vessel somewhere in international waters between Sumatra and Malaysia. Dutch and British merchant ships in the vicinity altered course. One of them, the Silver Star, was reportedly the first to reach the source. What the crew encountered has been described in scattered maritime reports and later investigative summaries, though no official registry confirms the ship's existence. The vessel identified itself as the SS Orang Medan. When boarding parties stepped onto the deck, they found no visible damage to the hull. The cargo holds were intact. There were no signs of piracy or storm impact, but the crew lay scattered across the deck and interior compartments. Every body reportedly showed the same expression: eyes wide open, mouths frozen in mid-scream, arms extended as if warding off something unseen. No wounds were recorded, no blood, no signs of struggle. Even the ship's dog was found dead, teeth bared toward the sky. Temperature readings taken inside the radio room were said to be unusually cold despite tropical conditions, outside exceeding 90 degrees Fahrenheit. The engine room showed no signs of mechanical failure. The cargo manifest, according to secondary sources, listed general goods. Yet some later accounts suggest hazardous chemicals may have been stored improperly, though no verified documentation has survived. Shortly after the boarding, smoke was reportedly seen rising from one of the lower decks. The Silver Star crew evacuated. Minutes later, a violent explosion tore through the Orang Medan, and the ship sank beneath the surface. No debris field was formally cataloged. No salvage operation was recorded, and no confirmed photograph of the vessel has ever surfaced. Maritime archives from the late 1940s show inconsistencies. Some shipping bulletins reference the distress call. Others omit it entirely. Lloyd's Register contains no listing for a vessel officially named SS Orang Medan. Yet multiple independent radio operators allegedly logged the same transmission within minutes of each other. If the ship never existed, then what produced the signal? Attempts to reconstruct the event have yielded fragmented leads. Dutch newspaper clippings from 1948 mention a mysterious ghost ship in Southeast Asian waters. U.S. intelligence summaries from the early Cold War period reference unidentified distress traffic in the region, but do not name a vessel. No survivor testimony exists. No confirmed wreck site has been located. The most unsettling element is not the reported deaths, nor the explosion. It is the broadcast itself. Maritime distress frequencies are tightly regulated. In 1947, unauthorized transmissions would have required a functioning radio operator and operational power supply. Someone sent that final message. The wording suggests awareness, sequence, and intent. If the SS Orang Medan was real, then its disappearance erased more than a crew. It erased a traceable origin. If it was not real, then the transmission represents something else entirely. A phantom signal that crossed multiple receivers, left no source, and sank without a record. The ocean often swallows ships, but in this case, it may have swallowed a signal that should never have been heard. Top 2. The return of the Mary Celeste. In December 1872, roughly 400 nautical miles east of the Azores, the British brigantine De Gradia sighted a vessel drifting erratically across the Atlantic. The ship's sails were partially set. Its hull rode low but stable in calm waters. No distress flag was raised. No crew could be seen on deck. When a boarding party crossed the gap between the two ships, they stepped into one of the most documented maritime mysteries in history. The vessel was the Mary Celeste, a 103-foot brigantine that had departed New York nearly a month earlier, bound for Genoa with a cargo of 701 barrels of industrial alcohol. On board had been Captain Benjamin Briggs, his wife, his young daughter, and 7 crew members. Yet when discovered, not a single soul remained. The cargo was largely intact. The ship's stores were sufficient for months. Personal belongings were undisturbed. The captain's logbook lay open. its final entry dated 10 days earlier at a position hundreds of miles away. One lifeboat was missing. The ship's chronometer and sextant were gone. There were no signs of violence, no blood, no struggle. The vessel itself was seaworthy enough to be sailed to Gibraltar for investigation. Official inquiries examined mutiny, piracy, alcohol vapor explosions, even seaquakes. None of the theories aligned fully with the evidence. The crew had left a stable ship in open water for reasons unknown. The case was closed without conclusion. The Mary Celeste became shorthand for abandonment without explanation. But what transformed the story from maritime puzzle to something more persistent were the reports that followed in later decades. Throughout the late 19th and early 20th centuries, sailors crossing the North Atlantic described encountering a brigantine with weathered sails drifting in heavy fog. Several accounts detail a vessel matching the Mary Celeste's dimensions, appearing briefly on the horizon before vanishing into mist without wake or signal. Some captains logged near collisions with a silent ship that did not respond to horn blasts or lantern warnings. In 1913, a British merchant officer recorded in his private journal an encounter with what he believed to be the Mary Celeste, though the original vessel had long since been salvaged and later wrecked in Haiti in 1885. Radar technology did not yet exist, yet experienced navigators insisted they saw a full-masted brigantine maintaining impossible headings against prevailing winds. Modern maritime historians attribute many of these sightings to atmospheric refraction known as fata morgana, a mirage effect that can stretch and distort distant vessels into ghost-like shapes. Under specific temperature inversions, ships beyond the horizon can appear suspended or duplicated. Yet this explanation does not address why the same vessel name continues to be invoked across generations, nor why sightings cluster in the same corridor of the Atlantic. Insurance archives and port records confirm that the original Mary Celeste was dismantled decades ago. No replica matching her specifications is known to have sailed those waters under her name. Still, as recently as the mid-20th century, isolated reports surfaced of a brigantine drifting without crew, sails half set, appearing briefly before dissolving into gray Atlantic haze. The Mary Celeste did not sink at sea in 1872. It was towed, investigated, and repurposed. And yet the image of that empty deck persists, reappearing in fog-bound shipping lanes where no such ship should exist. If the original mystery was abandonment without explanation, the deeper question now becomes something else entirely. Why does the Atlantic continue to return the silhouette of a ship that should no longer be there? Top 3. The Valencia Phantom Boat. In January 1906, the passenger steamer SS Valencia ran aground along the treacherous coastline of Vancouver Island during a winter storm. Heavy fog had concealed the shoreline. Conflicting navigational readings placed the vessel off course by several miles. When the hull struck submerged rocks near Cape Beale, panic followed almost immediately. The Valencia carried 108 passengers and crew. Lifeboats were lowered into violent surf. Several overturned before clearing the ship's side. Rescue efforts were delayed by brutal weather and the region's isolation. By the time help arrived, the vessel had broken apart against the reef. Official reports listed more than 130 dead. Bodies washed ashore for weeks along the Pacific Northwest coast. The wreckage eventually disappeared beneath shifting tides and rock. That should have been the end of the story. But in the years that followed, lighthouse keepers stationed along the same coastline began documenting unusual sightings. In heavy fog, especially during winter storms, a dark steamship silhouette was reported drifting dangerously close to shore near the original wreck site. Through spyglasses, some claimed to see figures clustered along the rails. Even more disturbing were accounts of a lifeboat packed with people, silently approaching the coastline before dissolving into mist. In 1910, sailors aboard a passing vessel reported encountering what they believed was a lifeboat from the Valencia, filled with motionless passengers. As their ship altered course to assist, the boat vanished into the fog within seconds. No debris was found. The sea remained calm. One of the most persistent elements in these accounts involved intermittent light signals. Lighthouse logs from the early 20th century describe faint flashes offshore, resembling maritime distress signals, but not matching any known pattern. The flashes would appear briefly, pause, and then cease entirely. No vessel responded to radio hails. No confirmed ship was ever located at the source. Marine scientists later proposed that atmospheric refraction could distort distant ships into ghostly apparitions. The waters around Cape Beale are known for strong temperature gradients between cold Pacific currents and warmer air layers. Under certain conditions, distant vessels can appear suspended above the horizon, magnified or inverted. Yet such optical effects do not explain sightings of lifeboats close enough for observers to describe faces and clothing. In 1933, a skeleton was reportedly discovered inside a lifeboat drifting near Berkeley Sound. Weathered and partially submerged, the boat matched the model carried by the Valencia. No official record confirms this find, yet the story circulated widely among local maritime communities. Whether fact or embellishment, it reinforced a growing legend that the Valencia had not fully surrendered its passengers to the sea. Government archives on the disaster remain publicly accessible, but references to post-wreck sightings are scattered and inconsistently documented. Some lighthouse logs from the early 1900s are missing pages corresponding to reported incidents. Later coastal surveys make no mention of the recurring lights. More than a century has passed since the Valencia split apart against rock. The Pacific has long since erased physical traces of the wreck. Yet along that stretch of coastline, fishermen and coast guards still speak cautiously about storm-bound nights when a steamship outline forms briefly in the fog, holding position where no vessel should remain. If a ship can vanish beneath waves and yet return in outline and light, then perhaps some wrecks do not settle quietly. Perhaps certain coordinates become fixed in memory, replaying the final moments of a disaster over and over against the edge of visibility. Top 4. The Baichimo Ghost Drift. In October 1931, the Hudson's Bay Company cargo vessel Baichimo became trapped in pack ice off the northern coast of Alaska near Point Barrow. The steel-hulled steamship, measuring 230 feet in length and weighing over 1,300 tons, had been delivering supplies to remote Arctic trading posts when early winter ice sealed its path. Temperatures dropped below negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Winds reached gale force. The crew shut down engines and prepared to wait out the freeze. Weeks passed. The ice tightened around the hull but did not crush it. A rescue aircraft evacuated most of the crew to Nome. A skeleton team remained aboard, hoping the spring thaw would free the vessel. Then, during a blizzard in late November, the Baichimo vanished from sight. When the storm cleared, the ship was gone. The remaining crew assumed it had been crushed and sunk beneath the shifting ice. But days later, an Inuit hunter reported seeing the Baichimo drifting freely several miles away. A search party confirmed the sighting. The vessel was intact, moving slowly with the ice flows. Boarding teams retrieved additional cargo and equipment, yet deteriorating weather forced them to abandon it again. Over the next several years, the Baichimo was reported repeatedly across the Arctic. Whaling ships encountered it adrift. Trading vessels spotted its smokestacks on the horizon. In 1933, a group of Inuit boarded the ship to shelter from a storm. They later described it as eerily preserved, its cabins undisturbed, its machinery silent but intact. What made the Baichimo unusual was not merely that it survived abandonment, but that it persisted. Between 1931 and 1969, more than a dozen confirmed sightings were recorded by pilots, sailors, and Arctic explorers. It was seen drifting hundreds of miles from its original trap point, sometimes embedded in ice, sometimes moving freely through open water. Naval engineers later analyzed its design. Built in Sweden in 1914, the Baichimo featured reinforced steel plating intended for Arctic trade routes. Yet survival for nearly 4 decades in extreme freeze-thaw cycles defied typical structural expectations. Arctic ice exerts crushing forces measured in thousands of pounds per square inch. Wooden vessels splinter, steel hulls buckle. But the Baichimo remained afloat far longer than engineering projections suggested. In 1962, a group of prospectors sighted the vessel lodged in pack ice. They attempted to claim salvage rights but were unable to reach it before shifting conditions forced retreat. In 1969, an Alaskan pilot reported seeing the Baichimo one final time, frozen into a floe west of Prudhoe Bay. After that, no confirmed sightings were logged. Efforts to locate the wreck in later decades yielded nothing. Sonar sweeps in suspected regions found no identifiable debris field. No sinking event was recorded. The Arctic, vast and indifferent, seemed to absorb the vessel without a trace. Unlike other ghost ships, the Baichimo did not vanish abruptly after a single tragedy. It lingered. It reappeared. It drifted through decades, seen by independent witnesses across different generations. It did not send radio signals. It did not blaze in spectral fire. It simply endured, silent and unmanned, moving along currents no one could fully predict. The Arctic is known to preserve what it claims. Mammoths remain frozen for millennia. Aircraft lost in snowfields emerged decades later. But a 230-foot steamship roaming ice fields for nearly 40 years challenges assumptions about probability and decay. If the Bachimo finally sank, it did so without witnesses. If it remains trapped beneath ice somewhere in the Beaufort Sea, it rests beyond modern search grids. Yet for nearly half a century, it behaved less like wreckage and more like a vessel unwilling to conclude its voyage. Some ships disappear in a single night. Others drift through history, refusing to be erased. Top 5. The Bannockburn Radar Ghost. On November 21, 1902, the steel freighter SS Bannockburn departed Fort William on Lake Superior, bound for Midland, Ontario. The Great Lakes were already entering winter transition. Ice warnings had been issued. Winds shifted rapidly across the open water, generating steep, short-period waves that could overwhelm even large industrial vessels. The Bannockburn was a 245-foot steel cargo ship, relatively modern for its time. It carried grain and a crew of 21. Shortly after departure, weather conditions deteriorated. Snow squalls reduced visibility to near zero. By nightfall, the vessel had disappeared from all known shipping lanes. No distress signal was recorded. No wreckage surfaced. No bodies washed ashore. The lake remained silent. Search operations in the following days found nothing. Lake Superior's depth exceeds 1,300 feet in some regions. Its cold, oxygen-poor waters are known to preserve wrecks intact on the lakebed. Yet sonar technology at the time was primitive. The Bannockburn joined a growing list of Great Lakes vessels lost without trace. But in the decades that followed, something unusual began appearing in ship logs. Beginning in the 1920s, captains navigating heavy fog near the eastern approaches of Lake Superior reported encountering a steel freighter matching the Bannockburn's silhouette. The vessel would appear through mist at close range, often on a collision course. Horn blasts were exchanged. Then, without altering speed, the ship would vanish. In 1954, during a severe storm, the captain of a Canadian ore carrier logged a radar contact directly ahead at a distance of less than 1 mile. The radar return was strong and metallic, yet visual confirmation revealed nothing. The signal disappeared within seconds. No other vessels were registered in the area. Great Lakes radar ghosting is a documented phenomenon. Temperature inversions over cold fresh water can bend radio waves, producing false contacts. Yet these typically appear stationary or distorted. Reports describing the Bannockburn apparition describe a moving vessel, maintaining course and speed before dissolving. Local maritime folklore eventually labeled it the Flying Bannockburn. Coast Guard crews occasionally mentioned brief radar echoes in regions corresponding to the original disappearance zone. None resulted in confirmed intercepts. Unlike oceanic ghost ships, the Bannockburn's legend is confined to an inland freshwater system. Lake Superior lacks tidal surges, strong transoceanic currents, or maritime traffic density comparable to open sea routes. Its isolation sharpens the anomaly. A steel freighter cannot simply be mistaken for a distant ocean liner. There are fewer variables. Modern sonar surveys have located dozens of historic wrecks across the lakebed. The Bannockburn, however, has not been conclusively identified among them. Some researchers believe it lies buried beneath sediment in deep central basins. Others argue it may have broken apart in shallow water and scattered beyond recognition. Yet the sightings persist in anecdotal accounts. Fog-bound nights, sudden radar blips, a steel outline emerging from gray water, silent and unresponsive. If the Bannockburn rests intact somewhere beneath Lake Superior, its hull would likely remain preserved in near-perfect condition. The lake has a reputation for keeping what it takes, but preservation at depth does not explain moving radar returns decades after the disappearance. The Great Lakes have claimed thousands of vessels over centuries of trade and industry. Most are documented. Most are found. The Bannockburn remains officially missing. When steel vanishes without debris and later returns as signal and silhouette, the question shifts. It is no longer simply where the wreck lies. It becomes whether something about the coordinates of loss continues to project outward, in reflection, in echo, or in something less easily categorized. Top 6. The Octavius Frozen Crew. In 1775, the crew of the whaling ship Herald reportedly encountered a vessel drifting aimlessly in the frigid waters west of Greenland. Its sails were tattered, but still raised. No signal flags flew. No crew stood watch. The sea was calm, the wind minimal. The ship appeared intact. Boarding the vessel, the Herald sailors stepped into what would become one of the most unsettling accounts in Arctic maritime lore. The ship was identified as the Octavius. Below deck, they discovered the captain seated at his desk in the cabin, pen still in hand, logbook open before him. His body was frozen solid. Nearby, other crew members were found in their bunks, preserved in ice. In total, 28 individuals, including the captain's wife and child, were said to be encased in frost as though time itself had halted. The final log entry was dated 1762, 13 years earlier. According to the account, the Octavius had attempted to return to England via the Northwest Passage, a route then poorly charted and rarely survived. If the date were accurate, it would mean the ship had drifted through Arctic ice for over a decade before being rediscovered. The Herald's crew allegedly removed only the logbook and left the Octavius adrift, fearing ice shifts could trap their own vessel. No confirmed salvage record exists. No official Admiralty document verifies the encounter. The Octavius was never formally registered as recovered or sunk. What transformed the Octavius from tragic expedition into ghost ship legend were the sightings that followed. Throughout the late 18th and 19th centuries, sailors navigating Arctic waters described encountering a silent, frost-covered brig drifting between ice floes. Its masts were described as coated in crystalline layers. No crew was visible. No smoke rose from its galley. Attempts to approach were often thwarted by shifting ice or sudden fog. Polar regions are notorious for optical distortions. Ice crystals in the atmosphere can refract light, creating towering phantom shapes or doubling distant objects. The phenomenon known as superior mirage can lift ships above the horizon, making them appear suspended in air. Under certain conditions, a vessel many miles away can be magnified and displaced. These explanations account for many Arctic apparitions. Yet the Octavius reports include recurring details: a captain seated upright in his cabin, a logbook frozen mid-entry, crew members motionless in bunks. Such consistency suggests either a widely circulated narrative influencing perception or an event etched deeply into maritime imagination. Modern historians note that no verified shipping record confirms the Octavius as an officially documented loss in 1762. Some argue the story may have originated as a cautionary tale about the dangers of Arctic ambition. Others suggest fragments of a real lost expedition may have evolved through retelling. What remains consistent is the motif of suspension, a ship locked in ice, preserved beyond normal decay, drifting through time. Unlike vessels that sink quickly or burn out at sea, the Octavius embodies a different maritime fear. Not destruction, but stasis. The Arctic preserves bodies for centuries. It keeps aircraft and campsites intact beneath snow. But a fully crewed ship drifting for 13 years without crushing underpack ice strains physical expectation. Ice exerts immense lateral force. Wooden hulls splinter, masts shear. Survival on that scale is improbable. If the Octavius was ever truly encountered in 1775, then its disappearance afterward leaves no wreck site, no debris, no further record. If it was not, then generations of sailors have described the same frozen vessel moving through waters where no such ship should remain. Some ghost ships blaze. Some transmit distress signals. The Octavius does neither. It drifts, locked in the moment of its final log entry, a vessel suspended between recorded history and unverified encounter. Top 7. The Burning Palatine. In the winter of 1738, a brigantine known as the Princess Augusta ran aground off the coast of Rhode Island, near Block Island. According to local accounts, the vessel was carrying a group of European immigrants when it struck a sandbar during heavy weather. What followed depends on which record is consulted. Some narratives describe the crew abandoning passengers. Others claim a fire broke out on board while the ship was still visible from shore. A more persistent version alleges that desperate survivors were left trapped as flames consumed the vessel offshore. Official colonial records confirm a wreck in the region that winter, but details remain fragmented. What solidified the legend, however, was not the wreck itself. It was what began appearing afterward. Within decades, residents of Block Island began reporting a strange light offshore on certain winter nights. Fishermen described seeing what appeared to be a fully rigged sailing vessel engulfed in fire, drifting just beyond the breakers. The flames were described as vivid but silent. No smoke carried inland. No debris washed ashore. By the early 19th century, lighthouse keepers had begun logging unusual observations. Some entries reference a burning ship sighted on clear nights with calm seas. Attempts to launch small boats to investigate consistently failed to locate any physical vessel. The light would fade or vanish as rescuers approached. The phenomenon became known locally as the Palatine Light, a name derived from the supposed origin of some of the passengers. Reports often describe the same sequence: a distant orange glow, the silhouette of mass against flame, then gradual disappearance. The recurrence was strongest in late autumn and winter, the same season as the original wreck. Scientific explanations have been proposed. One involves St. Elmo's fire, an electrical plasma discharge that can illuminate masts and rigging in storm conditions. Another points to marsh gas combustion or distant ship lights distorted by temperature inversions over cold water. Atmospheric refraction can magnify and bend distant light sources, creating the illusion of a larger, nearer object. Yet these mechanisms typically require active storms or specific electrical conditions. Many Palatine Light sightings occurred during relatively stable weather. Furthermore, consistent reports describe a complete vessel outline, not isolated points of light. In 1925, a passing steamer captain reportedly logged an anomalous lighted vessel on his starboard bow near Block Island. He altered course to avoid collision. Moments later, the image vanished, and radar, newly installed experimental equipment, showed no corresponding contact. Though early radar systems were unreliable, the log entry remains part of regional maritime archives. Block Island's coastline has been studied extensively. No persistent gas vents capable of producing repeated large-scale combustion have been identified offshore. Ship traffic in the area is steady but well documented. No known vessel matches the timing and appearance of the recurring fiery silhouette. Unlike other ghost ships that drift silently or appear intact, the Palatine Light manifests as destruction frozen in time, a vessel perpetually burning but never consumed. It does not send radio signals. It does not collide. It appears, illuminates the horizon, and dissolves. The endurance of the reports across nearly 3 centuries raises a pattern question rather than a single event mystery. Why does the apparition, if illusion, cluster precisely near the documented wreck site? Why do independent witnesses separated by generations describe similar details? The ocean surface reflects and refracts more than light. It distorts distance and perspective. But repetition across centuries suggests something more than random optical coincidence. The Palatine Light occupies a fixed coordinate, not just geographically, but historically, replaying a maritime catastrophe as if the sea itself retains the image. If some ships leave behind wreckage on the seafloor, others may leave something less tangible suspended above it. Top 8. The Lady Lovibond Return. On February 13, 1748, the 3-masted schooner Lady Lovibond departed London, bound for Oporto, Portugal. The voyage was said to be celebratory. According to later accounts, the captain had recently married, and his bride was on board. Superstition among sailors warned against women aboard ships, but the voyage proceeded. As the vessel approached the treacherous Goodwin Sands off the coast of Kent, something went wrong. One version claims a jealous first mate deliberately steered the ship off course. Another suggests navigational error in heavy current. What is certain is that the Lady Lovibond struck the sandbanks and broke apart. No confirmed survivors were recorded. The Goodwin Sands, notorious for swallowing vessels whole, concealed what remained. The wreck itself is poorly documented in official Admiralty records. Yet within 50 years of the supposed disaster, a pattern of sightings began to circulate among mariners navigating the same stretch of water. In 1798, exactly 50 years after the wreck, several captains reportedly logged a three-masted schooner illuminated against the night horizon near the Goodwin Sands. The vessel appeared to be heading directly into the shoals. Rescue launches were prepared, but before any contact could be made, the ship vanished. In 1848, reports surfaced again. A ship matching the Lady Lovibond's description was seen in calm conditions, sails full, gliding toward the sandbanks. The sighting was brief. No wreck followed. In 1898, lighthouse keepers and fishing crews claimed another appearance. The silhouette was described as sharply defined, lanterns visible on deck. Yet the sea remained empty upon inspection. By 1948, modern navigation equipment existed, including radar installations along the English coast. No confirmed radar record was released publicly that year. However, local anecdotal accounts suggest unusual maritime alerts were logged near Goodwin Sands during the anniversary period. The recurring 50-year interval is the element that distinguishes the Lady Lovibond from other ghost ships. Optical illusions and mirages occur randomly, influenced by temperature gradients and atmospheric distortion. They do not adhere to calendar precision. Statistical coincidence is possible. Maritime traffic near Goodwin Sands is dense. Historical memory can influence perception. If sailors anticipate a sighting during an anniversary year, interpretation bias may amplify ambiguous stimuli into a familiar shape. Yet the consistency of description, three masts, full sail, silent approach toward the sands, remains striking across generations. Goodwin Sands itself is a shifting formation. Wreckage is often buried, uncovered, and reburied by tidal movement. Numerous ships have been claimed by the shoals over centuries. It is conceivable that distant vessels navigating nearby were refracted into distorted images that resembled older sailing ships. But the 50-year pattern introduces a different dimension. Recurrence tied not to weather, but to time. In 1998, maritime enthusiasts anticipated another appearance. No confirmed sighting was widely reported. If the pattern held, 2048 would mark the next predicted return. Unlike vessels that transmit distress calls or drift through ice, the Lady Lovibond exists within a cyclical framework. It does not linger. It appears briefly, as though replaying the moment before impact, and then dissolves. If maritime ghost stories are shaped by memory, the Lady Lovibond is structured by interval. The sea around the Goodwin Sands remains active, crowded, and charted. Yet every half-century attention shifts to that coordinate. Whether coincidence, collective expectation, or something less easily categorized, the legend persists because it aligns with time itself. When a ship returns not randomly, but on schedule, the question changes. It is no longer simply why it appears, but why it waits. Top 9. The Flying Dutchman. The earliest references to the Flying Dutchman date back to the late 17th century, during the height of Dutch maritime expansion. The legend describes a Dutch East India Company vessel attempting to round the Cape of Good Hope during a violent storm. Its captain, often identified as Hendrik van der Decken, allegedly swore to complete the passage even if it meant sailing until the end of time. According to the tale, the ship was cursed to roam the oceans forever, never making port. Unlike most ghost ships tied to a single wreck site, the Flying Dutchman has no confirmed sinking location, no debris field, no archaeological trace. It exists almost entirely through recorded sightings. In 1790, the crew of HMS Guardian reportedly described seeing a phantom vessel glowing in stormlight near the Cape. In 1835, Captain Robert Fitzroy of HMS Beagle noted that sailors aboard had reported an apparition resembling the Dutchman. Most famously, in 1881, Prince George of Wales, later King George V, recorded in his naval journal that the crew of HMS Inconstant had witnessed a luminous red ship crossing their bow before vanishing. The descriptions remain remarkably consistent. A fully rigged 17th century vessel, often illuminated from within or outlined against lightning. It is typically sighted near the Cape of Good Hope, though reports have emerged from other oceans. It never responds to signal flags. It never alters course. By the late 19th century, the legend had spread globally. Steamship captains navigating heavy squalls off southern Africa occasionally logged unknown sailing vessel contacts in poor visibility. Some later sightings included brief radar returns in the 20th century, though these were inconsistent and never conclusively verified. Meteorologists point to optical phenomena common in turbulent maritime environments. Temperature inversions over warm currents like the Agulas can bend light, creating superior mirages. Lightning illumination can briefly outline distant ships in exaggerated form. Electrical discharge phenomena such as St. Elmo's fire can cast an eerie glow along rigging. Yet the Dutchman differs from most optical illusions in narrative persistence. The vessel is described not merely as distorted, but as archaic. Sail configurations match 18th century designs. Hull profiles resemble early East Indiamen rather than modern ships. One explanation suggests that the legend itself shapes interpretation. In regions where sailors are aware of the Dutchman myth, ambiguous visual stimuli may be interpreted accordingly. Storm stress, fatigue, and expectation bias can amplify uncertain observations into defined shapes. However, reports from experienced naval officers, individuals trained in identification and navigation, complicate that dismissal. Their accounts rarely describe fear or superstition. Instead, they document a vessel that appears real, maintains heading, and then disappears abruptly without physical trace. The Flying Dutchman also carries an additional pattern. Sightings often precede disaster. Several historical logs mention accidents or fatalities occurring shortly after encountering the phantom ship. Whether coincidence or retrospective narrative linking remains unclear. What distinguishes the Dutchman from other entries in this list is its endurance across centuries without a fixed coordinate. It does not cling to one wreck site. It does not follow a measurable cycle. It appears across oceans, tied instead to extreme weather and specific maritime corridors. If the Lady Lovibond represents recurrence by time, the Flying Dutchman represents recurrence by condition. Storm, horizon, lightning, then a silhouette from another era. No confirmed photograph has ever captured it. No radar trace has been preserved in archive. Yet its description remains stable from 1790 to modern accounts. When a legend survives unchanged through the age of sail, steam, and satellite navigation, it suggests either extraordinary narrative durability or an unresolved atmospheric phenomenon repeatedly misidentified in the same way. The Cape of Good Hope remains one of the most dangerous maritime passages in the world. Ships still navigate its waters under satellite guidance. Yet in heavy squalls, some captains still report a faint outline against the stormlit horizon. A ship that never docks, a crew that never arrives, a course that never ends. Top 10. The Kalush lights off the southern coast of Chile lies the Chiloé Archipelago, a region of dense fog, cold Pacific currents, and centuries of maritime folklore. Among local fishermen, one legend persists with unusual consistency. A luminous ship known as the Kalush. Unlike European ghost ship accounts rooted in 18th century wrecks, the Kalushe remains embedded in active, ongoing testimony. According to regional lore, the vessel appears at night without warning. Its hull glows with intense light. Music and distant voices are said to carry across the water. Those who approach report that the ship vanishes abruptly or dissolves into mist. Descriptions of the Kalushe have evolved with time. Earlier accounts portray it as a wooden galleon-style vessel with lanterns blazing along its decks. More recent reports describe a ship whose lights resemble electric illumination. Yet one detail remains consistent. It appears fully crewed, animated, and purposeful. The waters around Chiloé are complex. Cold currents from the Humboldt Current meet warmer coastal air masses, producing thick fog and frequent temperature inversions. These conditions are known to create powerful mirage effects, magnifying distant vessels or distorting shore lights into floating shapes above the horizon. Marine researchers have documented bioluminescent plankton blooms in the region capable of illuminating wake trails and breaking waves with blue-white glow. Electrical phenomena such as ball lightning and plasma discharges have also been reported along certain coastal corridors. However, the Kalushe differs from random atmospheric light in two critical ways: repetition and narrative detail. Fishermen separated by generations recount similar experiences. a ship emerging silently, decks brightly lit, figures moving along the rail, music audible across still water. Attempts to close distance consistently fail. The vessel either accelerates unnaturally or fades without directional retreat. Modern maritime traffic around Chiloé is monitored. Commercial vessels are logged. Fishing fleets operate with GPS tracking. Yet sporadic contemporary reports continue. In some cases, fishermen insist the Kalush appears in regions where no scheduled vessel was recorded at the time. Anthropologists note that Chiloé's maritime mythology includes stories of drowned sailors recruited into the crew of the luminous ship. In this interpretation, the Kalusha is less a wreck replaying its final moment and more a roaming vessel populated by those claimed by the sea. But even if framed as folklore, the environmental trigger remains consistent. Night, fog, still water, specific coastal coordinates. Unlike the Lady Lovabond, the Kalusha does not adhere to calendar cycles. Unlike the Orang Medan, it does not transmit identifiable radio signals. Unlike the Flying Dutchman, it is not restricted to storm corridors. Instead, it appears tied to a region where sea and atmosphere frequently distort perception, yet where witnesses insist the phenomenon exceeds simple optical error. The Kalusha stands as the only ship in this list reportedly still appearing in the 21st century. It is not confined to archival logs or 19th century journals. It belongs to living memory. If ghost ships represent unresolved maritime events replayed across time, the Kalushi challenges that framework. It does not appear damaged, it does not drift, it does not burn, it moves with intention. The Pacific waters off Chiloé remain active with fishing traffic and naval patrols. Satellite navigation blankets the region. Yet amid modern instrumentation, some crews still report seeing a fully illuminated vessel glide silently across the fog line before vanishing into darkness. Some ships are said to return where they sank. Some are said to replay catastrophe. The Kalusha, if witness accounts hold weight, does something else entirely. It sails. Across centuries of maritime history, thousands of vessels have vanished beneath waves, crushed by ice, swallowed by storm, or grounded on hidden shoals. Most leave wreckage, coordinates, and debris fields mapped by sonar. The sea keeps its dead, but it usually keeps them quietly. The ships in this investigation do not behave that way. The SS Orang Medan transmitted a final message that crossed multiple receivers, then vanished from official registry. The Mary Celeste was found abandoned, yet its silhouette continues to reappear in Atlantic fog. The Valencia and Bannockburn are tied to fixed coordinates where witnesses report recurring shapes and signals. The Bechimo drifted unmanned for decades, defying structural probability. The Octavius, whether legend or lost expedition, embodies preservation beyond expectation. The Palatine burns endlessly at sea without smoke. The Lady Lovabond returns on a measured interval. The Flying Dutchman persists across oceans and centuries. And the Kalush, according to living testimony, still sails. Individually, each case invites explanation. Optical refraction can bend light. Radar can generate false returns. Atmospheric plasma can produce luminous discharge. Psychological expectation can influence interpretation. Maritime folklore travels efficiently between ports, but collectively a pattern emerges. The phenomena cluster around specific conditions: fog layers, storm corridors, ice fields, shallow shoals, and temperature inversions. They often occur at or near documented sites of maritime tragedy. They repeat across generations, described in similar language by observers separated by geography and time. Some involve light, some involve signal, some involve movement without crew. The ocean is not merely water, it is a dynamic optical and electromagnetic environment. It reflects, refracts, and amplifies. It conceals wreckage beneath sediment while projecting distorted silhouettes above its surface. Under rare conditions, the boundary between visibility and invisibility becomes unstable. The question then is not whether every ghost ship account represents a supernatural vessel. The deeper question is why certain maritime coordinates continue to produce recurring anomalies long after the physical ships are gone. Are these sightings the result of persistent environmental distortions interacting with human expectation? Or do some catastrophic events leave behind residual traces, patterns of light, signal, or perception, that replay under specific atmospheric conditions? The sea records nothing in ink. It keeps no written archive. Yet across centuries, sailors continue to describe the same images rising from horizon lines and dissolving into mist. If a ship can disappear without wreckage and later return without substance, then perhaps the ocean does more than swallow vessels. Perhaps under certain conditions, it reflects them back. If these tales of phantom signals and silhouettes from the deep have changed how you look at the horizon, please subscribe and like the channel. We are excavating the history that the tides tried to bury. Help us navigate the unknown. The next maritime treasure will be uncovered soon.